My name is Elise Harrow. I'm 36, a chief warrant officer in Army Logistics, and I have spent most of my adult life believing that if a thing was written down clearly enough, it could not turn into a lie. That belief lasted right up until a Tuesday in February, when a woman at a title company in Savannah called to ask whether I had meant to put my mother's address on a quitclaim deed for land I had never seen. At 6:12 that morning, I was standing in a motor pool outside Fort Stewart, Georgia, with a clipboard in one hand and cold coffee in the other. We were doing pre-movement checks on 3 line haul trucks before a field exercise. It was dark enough that the floodlights flattened everything into one color. Tires, steel, gravel, men's faces, all of it looked equally tired. My phone buzzed once in my cargo pocket. I did not answer. In my line of work, if somebody is calling before sunrise, it is usually either trivial or terrible, and trivial can wait. The voicemail came from a woman named Dana Jeffcoat at Low Country Coastal Title. Her voice was careful in the way professionals sound when they think they may already be inside someone else's problem. She said she was trying to verify a transfer document associated with Parcel 18B in Effingham County. She said my name was on the chain of title as grantor. She said she needed to confirm a mailing discrepancy before she released final closing papers. Then she repeated her number twice. I did not know what Parcel 18B was. I did not own land in Effingham County, and nobody in the world had any reason to be moving property under my name at 6:12 on a Tuesday except somebody who was hoping I would not notice. By 7:05, I had listened to the voicemail 4 times. By 7:30, I had called her back from behind the dispatch office where the wind cut between the cinderblock walls hard enough to sting my ears. Dana told me the property was a 6-acre tract outside Springfield, Georgia, inherited through a family estate 2 summers earlier. She told me a quitclaim deed had been recorded the week before, transferring my interest to my younger brother, Nathan Harrow, for $10 and other valuable consideration. That sentence did something to my body that panic never does. Panic is hot and fast. This was cold. Precise. Mechanical. The sort of feeling you get when a serial number on a manifest does not match the number stamped into steel. Your mind stops making speeches. It starts making columns. I asked Dana to email me everything she was legally allowed to send. She said she could send the public filing copy and the cover sheet. She did. I opened the PDF on government Wi-Fi that dropped twice while loading. The deed carried my printed name, a version of my signature, and a notary block from Chatham County dated 6 days earlier. The address under my name was 147, Cotton Ridge Road, Millen, Georgia. My mother's house. That is when I sat down on an upside-down bucket behind the dispatch office and understood that this was not a clerical glitch. Nobody making up a stranger would have guessed that address. Nobody making up me would have picked somewhere invented. They would have used the one place in the country where they believed mail addressed to me still belonged to them before it belonged to me. Welcome back to Hidden Family Revenge, the place where the polite version of the story usually dies around the same time the paperwork starts talking. If you have ever been the dependable one by default, the one everybody quietly budgets around, stay with me. Leave a comment. Subscribe if this is your kind of truth. Some stories begin with shouting. Mine began with a county recorder's stamp and a fake signature that looked almost enough like my own to make me embarrassed. I grew up in Jenkins County, Georgia, in a faded ranch house with aluminum awnings and red dirt packed so hard in the driveway it rang under tires in summer. My mother, June Harrow, still lives there. She is 63 now and has the sort of face strangers trust immediately. Church lady face. Volunteer face. The face that remembers your children's names and whether your aunt had surgery. My brother Nathan is 33. He has started 3 businesses if you count things that existed mostly in conversation, and 2 of them if you only count tax filings. He has done roofing, pressure washing, dump trailer rental, and a short-lived online resale store that used my mother's dining room as a warehouse until Thanksgiving that year. People talk about families as if they are made of loyalty. Mine was made of assignment. By 19, I had learned my role. Nathan was the one people explained. My mother was the one people forgave. I was the one people trusted to understand. That sounds noble until you translate it properly. What it meant in practice was simple. If a bill came short, I could cover the difference. If a story didn't quite hold, I could be counted on not to make it worse. If something needed carrying, I had the stronger back. Families like mine love strong backs. They build whole moral systems around them. I joined the army at 20. Logistics fit me immediately because it rewards the exact thing my family had been quietly extracting from me for years: endurance without spectacle. Count it. Track it. Reconcile it. Don't cry over any number until you know what column it belongs in. For 12 years, I sent money home in irregular amounts that somehow became regular in expectation. Some months it was $200 for a transmission. Some months $450 for medication my mother's insurance did not fully cover. One winter it was $1,100 because Nathan's heat went out and his twins had bronchitis. None of that was forced from me. That is the important part. Nobody held a weapon. Nobody forged a transfer then. They asked, or half-asked, or let a situation sit in front of me until declining would have required more cruelty than agreeing. So I agreed. Over and over. And because I agreed often, the line between help and access disappeared long before I noticed it had. The property at the center of all this belonged to my grandfather first. 6 acres of pine, scrub, and low, stubborn ground outside Springfield, Georgia, where the road narrows and the mailboxes stand far apart like people who have known each other too long to wave every time. My Aunt Marilyn died in 2024 without children, and after probate the tract passed in equal shares to 3 heirs: my mother, my brother, and me. I did not ask for it. I did not particularly want it. But it was the first thing in my life that was legally mine and not tied to a lender, a lease, or a deployment packet. I had plans for it so small they felt safe to say out loud. A modest cabin someday. Maybe a place to retire to if I stayed long enough to earn one. Maybe nothing but taxes and trees for 10 years. The point was not what it would become. The point was that it was mine to decide. That should have been obvious to everyone. It was not. The week before Dana's voicemail, I had been in Augusta meeting with a construction lender about a future build. Nothing final. Just an exploratory appointment. I had started gathering documents because I am exactly the kind of person who starts a file before she starts a dream. Income statements. Les printouts. Credit report. Survey notes. Parcel maps. I had emailed one plat to my mother 2 weeks earlier because she said Nathan wanted to see where the back line lays. That was the phrase she used. See where the back line lays. As if property were a weather pattern. That detail mattered later because it meant the document trail did not begin in darkness. It began the same way these things often do, with access granted for one harmless purpose, then stretched 1 inch at a time until theft could still present itself as convenience. The notary on the deed was named Cheryl Van. I called her office first because in fraud you begin with the smallest verifiable facts. Was the stamp real? Was the commission current? Did she witness the signature in person? Her receptionist put me on hold, came back, and said Ms. Van was unavailable, but yes, the commission number was active. Yes, she had notarized a deed on that date. No, they could not discuss client matters without a subpoena. That word, subpoena, always changes the temperature. It means the world you're entering no longer cares whether your family still wants to sit together at Easter. At lunch, I called Nathan. He did not answer. I called again at 12:47. Straight to voicemail. I texted him a photograph of the recorded deed and wrote only one sentence. Call me before I start this somewhere official. He replied 18 minutes later with 5 words. Can we talk like adults? That message told me more than a confession would have. Innocent people do not lead with tone management. I called my mother at 1:20. She answered cheerful, mid-thought, as if stepping into the middle of her own conversation with herself. She asked whether I was eating enough. She asked whether Georgia had turned hot yet down my way, which was funny because she lives in Georgia too. Then she told me the azaleas had browned early and that the pastor's wife was having cataract surgery. I listened to all of it. Then I said, why is my name on a deed I didn't sign? There are silences that mean confusion. There are silences that mean grief. This one meant sorting. You could hear her choosing a road. When she finally spoke, she did not say what deed. She did not say that was impossible. She said, very evenly, "You know your brother has been trying to straighten himself out." That is not an answer. That is a philosophy. I asked again. She sighed, and the sigh itself made me angrier than shouting would have. It was the sigh of a woman tired of someone being difficult about an arrangement she had already approved in her own mind. She said Nathan was trying to consolidate things. She said the tax issue would be easier with one name. She said I was never there anyway. Then, because people always reveal the real logic one sentence later than they intend to, she added, "Honey, it's not like you were using the land." I have thought about that sentence more than any other in this story. Not like you were using it. As if ownership were validated only by immediate use. As if the right to keep something required performing it visibly enough for the family to acknowledge it existed. I said, "Did you know he signed my name?" She said, "I knew y'all were getting it handled." That phrase, getting it handled, is one of the dialects my family speaks fluently. It means don't inspect the steps too closely if the result would be convenient. I did not yell. That surprises people. They imagine revelations come with volume. Mine usually come with stillness. I thanked her for answering. Then I hung up and started building a timeline in the Notes app on my phone the way I build convoy packets. Date, action, document, witness, discrepancy. By 1600, I had 4 entries. January 29th, emailed plat copy to mother. February 3rd, title company inquiry. February 4th, received recorded deed. February 4th, mother acknowledged awareness without denial. At 17:05, Nathan finally called. He did not sound ashamed. He sounded inconvenienced. There is a tone some people use when they believe the only real mistake was letting consequences become visible. He said he had meant to explain. He said the buyer on the adjoining parcel wanted a clean ownership line. He said he was trying to package both lots for a better sale later. He said nobody was taking anything because I was still family and it would all come back around. I asked who witnessed me signing a deed in Savannah while I was on post 190 miles away. He got quiet. Then he said, "Mama said you'd understand once the numbers worked." That was when I learned the thing beneath the forgery was not urgency. It was entitlement made administrative. The next morning, before PT, I drove 30 minutes to a branch of Peach State Community Bank because the property tax notice for that land had always been auto-drafted from an account I maintained there. I needed to know whether anyone had changed contact information or beneficiary instructions on related records. A vice president named Alan Morrissey met me in a glass office with fake ficus in the corner and a bowl of peppermints on the desk. He wore the expression of a man who had already decided this conversation might become evidence later, and I respected him for that. He confirmed 2 things. First, a request had been made the previous week to redirect the annual tax correspondence for Parcel 18B to P.O. Box 441 Millen, Georgia, a box held jointly by my mother and Nathan's LLC. Second, the request had not been processed because the signature on the change form did not match the specimen signature on file from my original account paperwork. Did somebody come in person? I asked. He paused half a second too long, which is how professionals tell the truth before they are allowed to. Then he said he could not discuss the actions of other customers. He added that if I believed fraud had occurred, the bank's legal department would require a police report before releasing internal copies. There it was again. The wall. I want to stop here and say something plainly because this is the part people misunderstand when they haven't lived inside institutions. They imagine there is always a soft route. A family route. A reasonable route. Surely, if you explain nicely enough that you do not want anyone arrested, the bank or title office or county clerk can simply fix your name without escalating the matter. That route did not exist. Not once. Not anywhere I called. You could leave the forgery in place. Or you could contest it officially. There was no third option where the legal world pretended not to notice in deference to blood. For 3 days, I tried to invent that third option anyway. I called the county recorder. They said recorded instruments require either corrective deed from all parties or court action. Nathan could sign a corrective deed, yes. But because the original carried a notarized signature attributed to me, Any challenge to validity would likely trigger scrutiny of the Notary Act itself. I asked whether that scrutiny could remain civil. The clerk said that was not their determination. I called a real estate lawyer in Savannah. She said I had two main paths: file a quiet title action or report the deed as forged and seek emergency relief if a transfer was imminent. She asked whether I believed the buyer knew. I said I didn't know there was a buyer. She said there usually is when people rush paper. I called the title company back. Dana did not dramatize anything, which I appreciated. She told me the pending matter involved a sale contract on adjoining acreage, but that my tract had become an issue because the buyer wanted access easement continuity. She said if my signature were disputed, they would freeze disbursement on related components until counsel advised otherwise. That sentence mattered because it translated the situation into family language more clearly than any accusation could have. Money was waiting on the other side of this. Not sentimental land planning. Not tax simplification. Money. That night I drove halfway to Millen after work before turning around in a gas station lot outside Statesboro. I sat there with the engine running and the high beams aimed at a Coke machine. I could have made it to my mother's kitchen by 10:30. I could have stood under that yellow overhead light and demanded every page they had touched. I could have looked at my brother with his own face in front of me instead of hearing him through a phone. I did not go. Partly because I knew myself. If I drove there still half hoping for a family explanation, they would give me one. They would seat me. Feed me. Slow the air down. Replace facts with history. By midnight, I would be discussing Nathan's divorce, my mother's blood pressure, the twin school shoes, and the unforgivable selfishness of legal language in hard times. And I would leave with no paper in my hand except maybe leftovers. People like to think strength is loud. It is often administrative instead. So I turned the truck around and went back to post. On Friday morning, I called the sheriff's office in Effingham County to ask the question I had been walking around for 3 days. If I report a forged deed, I said, can I stop it after? The deputy on the phone did not make me say more than I was ready to. He transferred me to an investigator named Tessa Brantley. She was direct in the kindest possible way. She said once a report is made, it becomes the county's case, not mine. She said people sometimes believe they are only starting paperwork when what they are actually doing is turning on a machine. She said forged real estate documents can implicate multiple parties depending on who signed, who witnessed, who benefited, and who knew. I asked the question as narrowly as I could. If a mother knew, is that enough? Tessa said, knowledge is a fact pattern, not a family role. I wrote that sentence down on a fuel receipt. The following Sunday, my mother called me first. That alone told me the pressure had shifted. She never calls first when she believes time will solve something for free. Her voice was soft, even affectionate. She said Nathan had gotten ahead of himself. She said the deed could be straightened out privately. She said dragging the law into this would ruin him over a mistake. Then she told me what had actually happened, though not in a way she meant as confession. Nathan had borrowed against expected proceeds from a separate roofing contract. That contract fell apart. He owed 2 suppliers and 1 equipment rental yard. He had promised one of them he would have money by mid-February. The land, in his mind, was future money. My interest in it was an obstacle. So he solved the obstacle. Not because he hated me. Because he counted on me. That is a worse thing, sometimes. My mother kept talking. She said he had signed for me before on small things. A school permission slip once when she couldn't find her glasses. A package. Some insurance paper after my aunt died. She said it like precedent. Like repetition makes theft domestic enough to be harmless. Then she said the sentence that finally made the entire shape of the thing visible. You've always been the one in this family who had room. Room. Financial room. Emotional room. Moral room. Enough room to absorb damage without collapsing, and therefore, in their minds, enough obligation to absorb it. I wish I could tell you I answered with brilliance. What I actually did was stare at the cinderblock wall of my office and say, I'm going to fix my name. She started crying then, but not the kind of crying that admits guilt. It was grief at losing a system. Monday morning, I filed the report. I drove to the county annex during my lunch hour with a folder I had built the night before: deed copy, title company email, property records, screenshots of my call log, Les proving my duty location, and a statement I had typed in 12-point font because if I was going to put my family into the criminal justice bloodstream, I wanted at least one page in that file to look like me. Investigator Brantley met me in a room with beige walls and a table scarred by old ring marks from coffee cups. She was 41, maybe 42, wearing plain clothes and a sidearm that looked like she had forgotten it was there. She went line by line. Did I authorize transfer? No. Did I sign in front of Cheryl Van? No. Had I granted any power of attorney? No. Did I benefit from the deed? No. Had any family member informed me beforehand? No. When we got to my mother, I slowed down. Not because I meant to protect her exactly, but because naming your mother in a statement uses muscles childhood trains against. Brantley waited. That is one of the more merciful things any stranger did for me during this story. She did not fill the silence. She did not help me by looking sympathetic. She just let the empty space be costly. So I said it plain. My mother knew the transfer was being handled without my consent. My brother stated she said I would understand. The deed used my mother's address. A bank change request tied to the parcel was routed to a box used by both of them. Brantley wrote it down. Then she turned the page toward me and placed one finger on the signature line. Once this is signed, she said, you do not control the chain reaction. I signed anyway. The first consequence was not dramatic. It was procedural, which is its own kind of violence. A hold notice went to the title company. A request for supporting records went out. The notary was contacted. The parcel file was flagged. Nathan was asked to appear. My name, which had been a passive object in someone else's plan for at least 10 days, became an active variable in systems he did not control. For 6 days, almost nothing happened where I could see it. Then the calls began. First my Aunt Carol, who led with concern and arrived 30 seconds later at strategy. She asked whether I was sure I wanted to make it official over family land. Then my cousin Reese, who had not spoken to me in 9 months but suddenly felt the need to explain how stress makes people do dumb things. Then my pastor back home, who never once told me to lie but spent 12 careful minutes talking about grace in fractured households, which in practice often means women are asked to subsidize other people's sins with silence. Nathan called on day 7. He was angry now, not apologetic. Anger is what some people use when entitlement fails. He said I had made him look like a criminal. I told him forged deeds often do that. He said I was choosing land over blood. I said he had chosen my signature over honesty. He said if I loved the family, I'd sign a corrective affidavit stating there had been a misunderstanding and no intent to defraud. There it was. The new version of the old assignment. Take the loss yourself. Just in a more notarized format. He texted me a draft 2 hours later, apparently prepared by some local attorney or a friend of one. It described the deed as an administrative execution undertaken amid mutual family assumptions regarding future parcel management. That is the kind of sentence lawyers write when the truth, stated cleanly, would collapse the plan. Buried in paragraph 4 was the price. I would acknowledge that any signature irregularity arose from informal family authorization, and I would waive civil claims tied to delay, sale interruption, or associated damages. Translated into English, it meant this. They wanted me to say the forgery was functionally consent. They wanted my own hand to retroactively legalize what theirs had done. I printed it. I read it twice. Then I folded it and put it in the glove compartment of my truck because I wanted the physical sensation of having almost signed away my own reality. On day 9, the sheriff's office executed search process on records from the notary's office and took a formal statement from Cheryl Van. I learned that not because the county updated me generously but because Dana at the title company called to say all related files were frozen pending council review. She sounded tired. I asked whether closings were being affected. She said yes. That meant money had stopped somewhere. Which meant panic had moved from moral argument into cash flow. That evening, My mother drove to Fort Stewart and waited outside the visitor center because she knew I would have to come out if she texted that she was there. She brought banana pudding in a glass dish with plastic wrap over the top. I mention that because some women bring food as love and some bring it as leverage, and the tragedy is that from the outside those gestures look identical. We stood under a sodium light in a parking lot that smelled faintly of diesel and cut grass. She did not start with the deed. She started with my late father, which should tell you everything about her level of skill. She said he would be heartbroken. She said families survive by covering each other's weak places. She said Nathan had made a stupid choice. Yes, but stupid is not evil. Then she put her hand on my forearm the way she used to when I had fever as a child, and she said, very gently, "Baby, you have enough life to survive being generous." I remember the exact moment I understood her fully. Not as a villain. That word is too theatrical. I understood her as a bookkeeper of pain. She had spent her whole life deciding which child, which woman, which quiet one could absorb the damage cheapest. In her moral math, this was not wickedness. It was efficiency. If I signed their version, Nathan would keep working. My mother would keep her standing in town. The parcel issue might smooth out. And I, with my steady pay, no children, and government benefits, would remain the lowest cost place to store the loss. On a spreadsheet, she was not insane. She was ruthless in exactly the way survival teaches. I took the pudding dish from her because refusing it would have been a different fight than the one I had come there to lose. Then I told her no. Not loudly. Not with speeches. Just no. She started crying for real that time. The next 48 hours were the part people always think they want details on, because public consequences are easier to narrate than private systems. The county's inquiry widened. The title freeze caused a related purchase to stall. One supplier Nathan owed filed a civil collection complaint once it became clear the expected funds were not arriving. Cheryl Van's notary practices came under review because her seal had authenticated a signature I swore she did not witness. The attorney who drafted the corrective affidavit withdrew after learning there was an active criminal inquiry. None of that was vengeance from me. It was gravity after I stepped out from under what had been holding it up. And then the ugliest call came from my mother, not because she screamed, though she did, but because of what she finally said when screaming stopped working. You always think being right is the same as being good. That sentence stayed with me because it was the first criticism of me in this whole affair that contained any truth at all. I do care about correctness. Deeply. Pathologically, maybe. I trust clean lines more than messy mercy because lines don't reinterpret themselves later. But she was wrong about the rest. I was not doing this to feel righteous. I was doing it because without the written truth, my life would remain a public resource in that family forever. Today it was 6 acres. Tomorrow it would be a co-signed truck, a card application, a medical loan, an affidavit for temporary use. There is no bottom to a system that calls your boundary cruelty. Day 11, Nathan's lawyer called. His name was Russell Dane. Grey suit voice. Exact diction. Courteous in a way that told me he billed well for difficult family clients. He laid out an offer the assistant district attorney had not authored but would, in his opinion, look upon favorably if the underlying dispute were clarified by the complaining witness. That was me. The complaining witness. The proposal was simple enough to fit on one page and ugly enough to alter the next 7 years of my life. I would sign an amended sworn statement describing the deed as a misunderstanding arising from ongoing family property planning. In exchange, Nathan would execute a corrective deed restoring my share. My mother would provide a public letter acknowledging confusion over document handling, and all parties would cooperate to resolve the matter without further escalation. Privately, Russell also implied the county might lose interest if intent became too muddy to prove cleanly. Then he told me the cost I would carry for that mercy. Any civil dispute over document irregularity would become harder to pursue later. The title file would retain the mess longer. And most importantly, I would be swearing to ambiguity where my actual position was clarity. He did not ask me to tell a neat lie. He asked me to blur the truth until everyone else could live inside it. I almost said yes. Not because I doubted what happened. Because I could see the alternative arriving in real faces. Nathan's children. My mother's church. The slow death of small-town reputation. The practical misery that follows when people lose contracts, credit, and the fiction that their family is fundamentally decent. I took the paper to my truck. Sat there for an hour with a pen between my fingers. Read every line. There is a special exhaustion that comes when you realize your own honesty is about to become expensive in ways nobody will later reimburse. If you lie for them, they call it love. If you refuse, they call the fallout your choice. I thought about all the money I had sent over the years without ledger or receipt. I thought about how often I had told myself that asking questions would cheapen care. I thought about the land itself, those 6 rough acres I had not visited in more than a year. Trees. Sand. Wire grass. Nothing glamorous. But it was the first inherited thing in my life nobody had yet managed to rename as obligation. Then I said out loud, to the windshield, to the steering wheel, to whatever part of me still believed endurance was the same as virtue. No more unsigned accounts. That became the sentence. Not a slogan. A diagnosis. I met Russell Dane the next afternoon in his office in Springfield. My mother sat on one side. Nathan on the other. The room smelled faintly of coffee and carpet cleaner. There were framed marsh scenes on the wall, tasteful and generic, as if no one wanted clients thinking too hard about the actual ground outside. Russell slid the amended statement toward me with a pen aligned neatly across the top. I read the first paragraph again. Then I pushed it back unsigned. Nathan made a sound low in his throat. Not anger exactly. Panic. My mother stood up so fast her chair scraped the floor sharp enough to make the receptionist look up through the glass panel in the door. She said I was humiliating the family for dirt I had never even built on. I stayed seated. That matters to me when I remember it. I told Russell, in as level a voice as I could manage, that I would sign a truthful supplemental statement at any time. I would not sign one that reclassified forgery as misunderstanding. Nathan could cooperate. My mother could tell the truth. The county could do what it was going to do. But I was done lending my name to stories designed to protect everyone except the person whose name had been taken. Nobody answered immediately. Then my mother said the cruelest thing she has ever said to me, and perhaps the truest from where she stands. You were easier to love when you were useful. That one landed hard enough I still feel it in clean rooms. I left without looking back. Outside, the sky was white with spring glare and a fertilizer truck was turning onto the highway. I stood in the parking lot beside my Tacoma and understood something I had somehow missed through all the official steps. Filing on Nathan had not been the most expensive act. The expensive act was refusing the family revision when it arrived dressed as peace. The case moved slowly after that, which is what real systems do. The notary matter separated from the property matter. Nathan, through counsel, eventually signed a corrective deed restoring the status quo pending resolution. The land returned to the original ownership split, though the cloud on title took months to clear fully. The county pursued document fraud charges at a reduced level tied to false execution and filing irregularity rather than the more dramatic version people like to imagine from television. My mother was never charged criminally, but her statement to investigators did not help her. Too many half admissions. Too much I thought she knew. Too much we were just trying to get things organized. Nathan took a pre-trial diversion deal by early summer. Community service. Restitution tied to recording costs, legal expenses, and county processing. No felony conviction if he completed every term and stayed clean. People hear outcomes like that and think either justice failed or mercy won. Mostly, bureaucracy negotiated with backlog. What it cost me was quieter. The construction lender in Augusta withdrew from the preliminary process because title issues and active disputes on intended collateral make bankers nervous in the way wet wires make electricians nervous. I lost nothing I had already built, but I lost momentum. If you've ever tried to begin something stable after years of service, you know momentum is not a small thing. My family stopped calling all at once, which was somehow worse than a gradual fade. Silence can be a social verdict in places where everybody knows your middle name. Church ladies who had known me since VBS did not message. My Aunt Marilyn's old neighbor, who still sends Christmas cards to half the county, returned one of mine unopened that December with moved. Written in pencil, though she knew perfectly well where I lived. Small towns are masters of plausible deniability. The one person who surprised me was my cousin Hannah, who I had always taken for ornamental and slightly unserious. She called in July and said only this: "I don't think you broke the family. I think you stopped being the shelf everybody stacked their mess on." Then she changed the subject and asked about my dog. It was the most decent conversation I had that year. By August, the title cloud finally cleared enough that I could request a clean updated ownership packet. Dana at the title company sent it with one line in the email body: "For your records." Attached were the corrected instruments, release notices, and a fresh parcel summary. I printed all of it. 3-hole punched it. Filed it in a binder labeled Land. That probably sounds joyless. It wasn't. It felt holy. In September, my mother sent me a handwritten card for my birthday. No apology. No mention of the deed. Just a Bible verse about peacemakers and $20 folded inside like I was still 19. I mailed the 20 back with a receipt slip from my own notepad that read, "Funds returned. No balance due." That was petty. It was also the first clean accounting we had ever had. Nathan's first restitution payment reached me in October. $40. Money order. The memo line said recording fees in block print. I stared at it for a long time before depositing it. Not because the amount meant anything against the cost, but because it was the first time in my life anyone in that family had put in writing that what they owed me could be measured. That is what changed me more than the deed itself. Not the betrayal. Not even the forgery. The measurement. People who grow up in systems like mine are often taught that counting ruins love. That receipts are for strangers. That only cold people need things spelled out. What I learned instead is that vagueness is often the most expensive thing in the room, and it usually arrives wearing the face of loyalty. I drove out to the land alone in November. There was no dramatic weather. No orchestral sunset. Just a grey afternoon, damp ground, and the smell of pine needles crushed under my boots. I stood near the back line where the plat map bends at an awkward angle around an old drainage ditch. The property was exactly as underwhelming and exactly as beautiful as something honest tends to be. No story. No performance. Just boundaries that existed whether anyone respected them or not. I took a fence post driver out there in the truck bed because that seemed like the kind of person I wanted to become, one who marks her own corners in visible ways. I set one metal T-post near the eastern edge where the line meets the county easement, not because a single post secures 6 acres, but because I needed to do one physical act that contradicted the whole family theory of me. I needed to put something into ground and say, this stays where I place it. On the drive back, my mother called for the first time in nearly 2 months. I let it ring once, twice, 3 times. Then I answered. She sounded older. Truly older. Some people age in the face. She had aged in the voice. She asked where I was. I told her. She said, "You went out there by yourself." I said yes. There was a long silence. Then she said something so small I nearly missed it. I never had anything nobody else had a say over. That was the closest she ever came to an explanation. Not apology. Not ownership. But explanation. And because truth is often more complicated than vindication, I believed her. I believed she had spent a lifetime in rooms where whatever she held could be claimed by whoever needed it worst, whoever was loudest, whoever was nearest, whoever was called family. I believed she had passed that law to me because it was the only law she knew. I believed all of that and still did not yield 1 inch. Compassion is not the same as surrender. That took me 36 years to learn. I rent in Hinesville now, not far from Post. The build can wait. The land is still there. Taxes are auto-paid from an account only I control. The mailing address on every relevant file routes to a locked box in my own name. I keep a scanned copy of the corrected title packet in 3 places. Some people would call that excessive. Those people have never had relatives confuse love with access. Nathan finished diversion in the spring. Last I heard he's working for a grading company outside Statesboro. Steady enough. My mother still attends the same church. We speak twice a month on average. Never about the deed. Families do not become healthy just because a legal record becomes accurate. They simply lose the ability to lie in certain directions. At Christmas, I went home for exactly 4 hours. I brought store-bought pecan pie, sat through lunch, complimented the Collards, asked the twins about school, and left before dusk. On the hall table by the front door, beside the bowl where my mother keeps keys and old receipts, I noticed a stack of mail rubber-banded together. None of it had my name on it. That was enough of a miracle for one visit. A few weeks ago, I was paying for gas off Highway 84 when a folded paper slipped out of my wallet and landed by the register. The clerk picked it up and asked if I needed it. It was the fuel receipt I wrote Brantley's sentence on the day I called the sheriff's office. Knowledge is a fact pattern, not a family role. The ink had faded almost grey at the creases. I folded it back the same way and put it where it lives. That is my story. A forged deed. A mother who thought use entitled access. A brother who turned assumption into paper. And one line I finally had to draw with my own hand because nobody in that family was ever going to draw it for me. If you are the one everybody counts on, check what your name is attached to. Check who still gets your mail. Check whether the thing you call help has quietly turned into permission. And if this hit home, tell me in the comments what role your family wrote for you before you were old enough to refuse it. Because the hardest thing I learned is this. A family that survives by assigning one person all the room will call the day she closes the ledger betrayal. And she will still be the one who has to write closed across the page.